Good evening, and welcome to our event tonight. Just as a matter of process for the flow, where this is the welcoming to all of you. Thank you for coming. We're looking forward to a very interesting and enlightening event. And we're going to have the opening prayer, a few words about what the Hellenic Society Pedia is and what we're trying to do. Then we'll introduce our featured speaker tonight, Professor Alexander Lingas, and he will go into the presentation. We'll follow up with questions and answers, and then we'll continue our good parea and our fellowship after that. There is plenty of sweets there on the table for you to enjoy. At this point, please silence your cell phones, okay? No texting, no cell phones now. Just put them down. That's it. Okay. Fathers, please now, if you could come and we'll have our prayer, opening prayer.
If we could offer the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and to ages of ages. Amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Holy Father, bless.
Jesus Christ, our God, we thank you for our gathering this evening and for the excitement of this program, which takes us back to our roots, to our beloved Hagia Sophia, and the special sound that emanated over the centuries. We thank you for all the good work that our presenter Alex has done over the years and continues to do in our church tradition, in our musical tradition. Continue to bless him, the group with which he works, and the ministry that he carries out on behalf of all of us. We pray for our Pedia Society. Thank you for the leadership of John, for his board, for the members, for the ladies who worked hard this evening in preparing our refreshments. And again, thanking you for our program and asking you to lead Alex in guiding us through this program so it'll be educational and beneficial and enjoyment for all. For you are holy unto the ages of ages. Amen.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Father. Thank you. So welcome to all of you who are here in person, and welcome to all the people who are doing the streaming tonight. And we arranged that so people who cannot travel, they should have the opportunity to listen to our program tonight. Before I forget, we should acknowledge some of the people. Without them, nothing of this would be possible. Calypso, Paul and Peggy, Sylvia, Angie, Carol, Hitsapanos, Martha Sotos, and Mia Spears, and many, many of you, as well as we thank Father Nicholas and Father Philemon Patitsas for their leadership and collaboration and for fostering and encouraging these events. Many, many thanks to Barbara. Without Barbara, nothing happens, really. And also, many thanks to Nicholas Bambakos, who did this special setup for us today. And you're going to listen to the music through the big speakers, as well as the special setup from the hall for the streaming. Thank you, Nick. And to the heads of the organizations that spread the word, as well as to our liaison to the Parish Council, Maria Tarasidis, as well as to the Parish Council for their hospitality. A few words about Pedia. So, Pedia, the question came a bit earlier. What does Pedia mean? Pedia, in a strict word interpretation, would mean education, but it's a lot more wider and diverse than that. It includes education, it includes also culture, it includes character, it includes the way people conduct themselves, the proper way people conduct, and then this is Pedia. So this Hellenic Society Pedia of Virginia, what we're trying to do, we're trying to preserve the culture and the civilization that some of us brought it with us, and our forefathers brought it from Greece, the language and orthodoxy, which are very well merged and blended together. And how do we achieve that? Through programs like tonight. Educational and cultural programs, and also we're trying to understand what it means to be, what does Hellenism mean, and what it means to be or to practice Hellenism. In Greek, we call it Romiosini. That means there are many ways of describing it, but living it in a way with pedia, with character, with integrity, and another word that describes it is a lot of us know philotimo. So a little bit tooting the word of pedia. Since 1994 that pedia was established, we brought here 38 educational and cultural events in the last 31 years. We try to also help with academic as well as scholarships or partial scholarships for the Ionian village. And all this happened with your generous support. So we thank you, and we appreciate your participation tonight as well as throughout the year. And please think about serving with us. We always welcome new ideas, new people, and young blood. Now, this fall symposium is dedicated to Manuel Lupasi. Many of us knew Manuel. He had a remarkable life from humble beginnings in Crete and then to the United States through his hard work. His motto was everything earned, nothing given. He had a lot of pride, determination, and self-confidence, and never forgot his roots. And you can see from the photos there, he cherished time with family and friends, and he did not dare, even in his advanced age, he carried the torch at the Atlanta Olympics, as well as he ran a whole marathon in Greece. We're talking about in 1996 and 97. So he was a remarkable person. We're going to miss him. We're missing him, and we're still appreciate the help and participation of his wife, Carol. And now, we are now trying to introduce Dr. Alexander Lingas, Professor Lingas. Difficult to do that in a few lines here, in a few bullet points. He's the music director and founder of Capella Romana. We were fortunate as Pedia to have Capella Romana here in 2013. And we had a whole recital as well as participation in the liturgy and chanting the following day. So we remember quite well. You know, many things that you see here, very difficult to describe his kind of very interesting and diverse background and his the education in music of all sorts. So now he is a visiting professor at St. Vladimir's. He is still a professor of music at the Orthodox Christian Studies in Cambridge. He is a professor emeritus, as you see here, at St. George's University of London. He deals with all kinds of music, especially Byzantine music, but from a historical perspective and ethnographic perspective, as well as performance with the choir, with Capella Romana. The epitome of all is that in 2018, His All Holiness Bartholomeos, our ecumenical patriarch, bestowed on him the archon Musikodidascalos. Musikodidascalos, that's very important. Didaskalos, teacher, musiko, of music. So it's not as simple as say, we are a teacher of music in a high school, right? It's a lot different, okay. So, without more, here is Professor Lingas.
Thank you so much, Reverend Fathers, members of the Pedia Association, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me back here to Richmond once again. Into presenter mode, right. All right, so my topic this evening is recovering the lost chant of Hagia Sophia. So I think the Sophia part, at least most people are familiar with. The great church of Cathedral of Constantinople, New Rome, now modern Istanbul, constructed between the years 532 and 537 under Emperor Justinian I, Emperor Saint Justinian I. So the building's still there, that the interior has been changed in some ways. So I'm going to start my story by talking about just as the world was entering lockdown in 2020, National Public Radio released a story about a project based at Stanford University to recreate the sonic experience of Christian worship at this church. By the end of the year, it had become NPR's most popular story of 2020. So this evening, I'll be looking more closely at the tradition of sung worship studied and brought to life by the multifaceted project Icons of Sound. And this is a project on the aesthetics, acoustics, and worship of the Justinianic Great Church of Hagia Sophia that was featured in this NPR story. So this project, Icons of Sound, has been very much a collaborative effort, and it was initiated and led at Stanford University by my friends and colleagues, Professors Bisera Pencheva in Art History and Jonathan Abel of the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, which they call CARMA for short. What I'd like to do now is first offer a brief introduction then both to the Icons of Sound project as a whole and then to some of its technical aspects that attracted so much attention. So this project started up in 2008, again, as I said, based at Stanford University, and it happened to be just a sort of happy meeting between what people were doing at the Center for Computer, Music, and Research and Acoustics, CARMA, who were interested in things like recreating the sound of buildings in sort of virtual spaces. So sort of a sonic virtual reality is what they were interested in. So of course located in Silicon Valley, got lots of patents that have come directly even from CARMA, which have helped subsidize the place. So they were kind of interested in pushing the envelope of the technology in some ways. And then Bisera Pencheva is a historian of art of the Byzantine world. And she was very much interested in the sound inside these buildings, and especially Hagia Sophia, where at that time it was still a museum. And as a museum, part of the strict policy of secularism that was being enforced was that nobody, no Muslim singing, no Christian singing, zero. That's how they decided to, Archaeological Service, kind of their rule for the place. So anyways, this project had sort of got its start in around 2008. And in 2009, I came to Stanford with Capella Romana, with the ensemble I founded and continue to direct. I gave an academic lecture about medieval Byzantine chant. And also, we did a performance of some medieval chant in their lovely University Church, which you can see there. It's a beautiful building. And from then on, we kind of got involved in it. What has happened since, as indicated by this illustration, this Icons of Sound has been active in all sorts of fields, producing a range of outputs for general and academic audiences, lectures, conferences, workshops, performances, and recordings. So what I'm going to focus on, though, specifically is one product of this project, which is the Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia recording that was done at the Karma Studios by Capella Romana. This was recorded at Stanford in 2016 and was released along with a documentary film directed by Dugo Erochman in 2019. So I'm going to introduce you to the repertoire, the music that was performed in these Constantinopolitan services, specifically for the 14th of September. That was the day we chose as a good day in the liturgical calendar to feature on our recording. And by looking at how the solemn commemoration for the exaltation of the Holy and Precious and Holy Cross was celebrated according to the ancient traditions of Justinian's great church, we will encounter some forms of worship and music that vanished from the living experience of the Orthodox Church after the Ottoman conquest of 1453. So the lost part is not just that people were not allowed to sing after the Ottoman conquest, Christian in the building, but also there were some forms of worship particular to the traditions of that church that are no longer in use today. So again, so how did they go about this? Well, okay, so as I've already mentioned, the building was a contested kind of space where no chant was permitted, and now it's since become a mosque where only one type of chant is permitted. So when Professors Pencheva and Abel teamed up, they were given permission to take some acoustical readings in the church. So in 2010, Bisera Pencheva, during the off hours when the museum was closed, went in and popped a bunch of balloons and had microphones that recorded the sound impulse, the spectral impulse that came from that. So this, in other words, this was, as my colleagues Jonathan Abel and his former student Elliot Canfield Duffy-Lou have written, it was what they were measuring was a response to a pulse so short in duration that details of its shape can't be heard and are irrelevant. So such a pulse, when it was produced from the ambo, so the place where the old pulpit used to be, in other words, under the dome of Hagia Sophia, produced this spectrogram that you can see here, which shows prominent reflections as vertical features and the late field reverberation, in other words, how long the sound stayed in the air, fading over 10 seconds or so in the mid-frequencies and decaying more quickly at high frequencies. So this, one of the things they discovered is that this building has a very particular sound signature. That if in the mid-range, which is kind of where the human voice operates, that it carries that sound for an extraordinarily long time, around 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, it's that. So many, if you've been to resonant churches, we tend to think that maybe there's a kind of long ring time or echo, though it's not technically an echo. When we hear it, it's like 2 or 3 seconds, but this is 10 plus. So that's the sort of the question of the sound itself. So without denying its power, though, and of this highly unusual sonic profile of the building, there was much more to sung worship at Hagia Sophia than that. To understand how it could be perceived as a sounding icon of the heavenly liturgy, which is how it was understood, and we'll talk a bit more about that, but it's that it was basically the notion of that building as it was understood theologically was a place where human voices, role of angels. In other words, in making an earthly icon of the perpetual heavenly liturgy at the throne of God. But to see how they carried this out, we have to actually look at the content and form of its services. At the broadest level, this means distinguishing the rite of Hagia Sophia, the particular set of forms of services, from those of other traditions in the long history of Byzantine worship. So, just while we're at it, this is a picture, by the way, of an ambo. So Hagia Sophia it no longer does. This is a diagram of it. used to have a two-stair ambo like the one you see here. And the place of the choir was originally around the ambo, and soloists would ascend it at certain times for certain chants. One of the things you can see, actually, I don't know if it's pretty far away, but some of the singers in these illustrations have beards and some do not. And that's because some of the soloists at some periods in Hagia Sophia's history were eunuchs. They were male sopranos, castrated males, castrati. So the rite of Hagia Sophia arises in late antiquity when the Roman Empire, under Emperor Constantine, St. Constantine moves its capital to Constantinople, and the time of the legalization of Christianity. And at that time what we see is around the whole Roman world a kind of unity in ritual and linguistic diversity. So basically we find in the major areas of the empire, the major cities, people doing Christian services more or less the same way in broad outline. Everybody had a divine liturgy or Eucharist or Mass. Everybody had morning and evening prayer, matins and vespers. But how they actually did them, the details would differ to varying degrees from place to place. And these traditions tended to be grouped around particular economic or ecclesiastical or political centers. So, for example, the ones that modern scholars recognize as being distinct to varying degrees from each other were the ancient rites of Jerusalem, Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, which essentially the early Constantinopolitan forms seem to come largely from Antioch, or some also from influence from Cappadocia. So if you can think of those two people, if you know the names of our two standard Eucharistic liturgies, St. John Chrysostom was in Antioch before he went to Constantinople, and St. Basil was Basil of Caesarea. He was from Cappadocia. So there seemed to be, Constantinople wasn't originally one of those places, and because it becomes an imperial capital, and then people start bringing stuff there. But also Milan was an important place where there's a rite still today called the Ambrosian Rite. So if you go to the Archdiocese of Milan, Roman Catholic churches, they celebrate a different form of worship than the rest of the Roman Catholic Church in the Archdiocese. They start Lent on a Monday. So from the time of St. Ambrose, they've had a kind of Eastern orientation. There used to be also local traditions in Spain and Gaul that are no longer in existence. So what did these people sing, though? What were those sort of common elements across? Well, before the mid-4th century, we don't really know in much detail. Some of this is because of the state of the evidence, when Christianity was essentially illegal or just barely tolerated in the Roman Empire. And some it also has to do with questions of terminology, because we find some of those early church fathers using the terms hymn and psalm interchangeably. So you could write your own psalm, in other words. Now we tend to think of it just the ones in the Bible, the biblical Psalter. But from the mid-4th century onwards, across the whole empire, it becomes mostly biblical texts. So psalms and other song texts, canticles from the Bible. So the generic term for this is psalmody, but in fact some of these things are from those moments like, if you read the Bible, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, there are some parts where it's a little bit like a musical, Broadway musical. You have the action happen, they cross the Red Sea, and then what happens? Then all of a sudden there's a song, they sing. And so some of those songs were then appropriated by the Christian communities. So how did they sing these? Well, they sang them either verse by verse, just going straight through the texts, or using patterns of call and response singing. So one person, a soloist does something, and then people respond back. And then the soloist does something again, the people respond back with a refrain. So the simplest form is simple call and response, responsorial psalmody. And then the kind of a twist on that is what we call antiphonal psalmody, which is where you have two or more groups doing the verses, to which there also is a refrain. There could be at least one refrain. Sometimes in some cases there are two refrains. And the old term for that refrain was antiphonon. Antiphonon has a number of other meanings like octave as well, but I won't confuse you too much about this. We have canonical legislation, canons of the church, rules of the church, which tell us also that this was the sort of singing people were supposed to do at this time. There are especially these two canons from this local council in Laodicea in the 4th century. Canon 15, no others are to sing psalin in church besides the canonical cantors, canonikon psalton, who ascend the ambo and sing from a parchment. So there's a kind of official authorization. Of course, that means that doesn't mean nobody else sang, because we have congregations singing refrains. We know that. So this means, but who is setting that now that we're supposed to have set texts by officially designated church musicians who actually are in minor orders. They are readers or cantors or something. Also, but what helps explain the previous one, Canon 59, one must not recite privately composed psalms, idioticus psalmus, nor non-canonical books in the church, but only the canonical books of the Old and New Testament. There are reasons for this. This was the period of the establishment of the Christian church in the public life of the Roman Empire, was also the beginning of the great Christological controversy, the controversy over who Jesus was, starting with Arius. And so we're celebrating this year the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea in 325. And this is one of the things saying, you can't randomly compose your own hymn and sing it in church, because the Arians were really known for their catchy hymnody. So one way to do this was to kind of circumscribe the repertory, to make it, by making it biblical, and everybody agrees that the Psalms are, prophetic. They are the scriptures, of which the Creed and other, texts talk about. So you can do those. And also we have a lot of testimony from church fathers like St. John Chrysostom saying, telling us also why, not just, what, but why. So, for example, in this homily, St. John Chrysostom writes, when God saw that the majority of men were slothful, that they approached spiritual reading with reluctance and submitted to the effort involved without pleasure, wishing to make the task more agreeable and to relieve the sense of laboriousness, he mixed melody with prophecy, so that enticed by the rhythm and melody, all might raise sacred hymns to him with great eagerness. For nothing so arouses the soul, gives it wing, sets it free from all the earth, releases it from the prison of the body, teaches it to love wisdom and to condemn all the things of this life as concordant melody and sacred song composed in rhythm. So some of this is, the first half is sort of pretty much catechetical. It's a way of getting the text into people who would find it kind of tedious just to recite doctrine. But on the other hand, there's more than it. Nothing so arouses the soul, gives it wing, sets it free from the earth. So there also is something very particular about music, which the church fathers recognized, and some of them, they recognized this because they had all had received classical Greek educations. They had received pedia, actually, where they learned about that music was actually, to them, one of the things that bound the universe together. If you've heard of the harmony of the spheres ever, this notion, or even in modern speech today, we talk about, we're in tune with each other, and we're with harmony with each other. Well, there's a tradition going back to Pythagoras that saw then it was expounded in greater detail by Plato in books like the Timaeus, that the whole universe from top to bottom, from the macrocosm of the heavens to the microcosm of our souls, was ordered musically. That's another lecture. Maybe I'll come back and do that sometime, but I couldn't resist. So anyway, so now, one thing to know about, and about the rite of Hagia Sophia, and in its relationship to what we have today, is that the history that produced the services that are sung in the cathedral next door here were the process of a long process of interchange between these different regional centers, of which the two most significant for the creation of the services that are sung next door are the rites of Jerusalem, the Agiopolitis, the Holy City, and the rite of Constantinople, of the Ecclesiastis, the rite of Hagia Sophia. So one of the things that, if you read some older texts, I should notice, like Father Alexander Schmemann's Introduction to Liturgical Theology, he will assume that these two blended fairly early. Now modern scholarship is showing actually that the two remain distinct for far longer, and in some ways all the way up to 1453 for the old rite of Hagia Sophia. So what scholars call today the Byzantine Rite, in other words, the services sung next door, have some parts from Constantinople. So the three Eucharistic liturgies, the divine liturgies of St. Basil, St. John, Chrysostom, and of the Presanctified Gifts, those originally come from Constantinople. The books of readings that we have today are cycles of readings, the lectionaries, with their associated psalmody, the Procimena Luiaria, are also from Constantinople. And we have a Constantinopolitan calendar today, the Synaxarion. However, what we have also in modern Orthodox services is a cycle of daily prayer from Jerusalem, the Palestinian Orologion. The Book of the Hours is a Palestinian book. The cycles of hymns that were attached to it, think of some of you know these names, may have heard of them: John of Damascus, Sophronius of Jerusalem, Cosmas of Mayuma or Jerusalem. They were people who were part of that local tradition originally. And so essentially what we have are Constantinopolitan sacraments today and readings, and the service of the hours, the daily cycle from Jerusalem. Now, Hagia Sophia had its own cycle of daily prayer. So the old rite of Hagia Sophia had those three Eucharistic divine liturgies that we know today, but it also had this liturgy of the hours, the daily cycle of prayer, the Ecclesiastis or the Ecclesiastikos, that by around the 12th, 13th century, some people were also calling it the Asmatikia Koulouthia, or sung office. That form of daily prayer was in use up until the Fourth Crusade in Constantinople, till 1204, as the daily cycle of prayer. And then it gets stopped by the Fourth Crusade, when Hagia Sophia becomes, until 1261, a Roman Catholic cathedral for a brief period. It remained, however, in use in Thessaloniki until 1430, and it would be revived, including at Hagia Sophia itself, on certain feast days, the old service. But in the later period, it was only Thessaloniki that kept it on a daily basis. So it had two major daily services: Vespers, Lichnikol, and Matins, Orthros, the morning prayer service. And then it had some shorter services, prayer snacks during the day, midnight office, 3rd, 6th, 9th hours. There were two minor offices that were done only at certain seasons of the year, one called Trithekti, one other called Panichis. So one's an afternoon service and one's a night service. Also, there were forms of worship that were particular to going from place to place in the city, what scholars call stational liturgy. So in other words, you started at Hagia Sophia, and then you process to the Forum of Constantine, and then you end up, if it's the Feast of the Mother of God, at one of her churches, at the Church of Chalkopratia, for the rest of the service. So who were these people singing? Well, we actually have imperial legislation telling us exactly how many people were on staff. So the Emperor Heraclius lists as state employees in his 1612 novella number 1. There were 80 priests attached to Hagia Sophia, 150 deacons, some of whom also served as soloists and choir masters, 40 deaconesses who had their own choir, 170 some deacons who sometimes sang with the readers, 160 readers who were the main choir, 25 cantors, psalte, who were the elite choir. Also, we find other sources, later ones mention that there was a boys' choir of the imperial orphanage that would come and sing. So that was part of the music education system. There were male and female monastic choirs, and then also sometimes the congregation sang as well. So it's a vast musical institution, divided admittedly over actually 4 churches, so not everybody would be at the same place every single time. So we can isolate certain phases of the development of this old form. There's the form up until the period when there was the disputes over the use of icons, iconoclasm, in the Orthodox Church. And there we have one service book, which survives. It was copied in southern Italy, which is why it survived. We have the buildings, and we have literary witnesses, sermons, church historians, legislation, which tell us about it. From the 9th to the 13th centuries, we have a lot more information. We have books of prayers for the celebrant in multiple copies. We have psalters, books, copies of the biblical psalms divided up according to the order which they were done at Hagia Sophia, which is different from that that they used in Palestine. We have books of rubrics, directions. On this day, you do this. On this day, we sing this. We also start to have notated musical manuscripts. This is the period of the rise of musical notation. And so especially that notation would be used for the more difficult music. So the festal chants. And some of these survive in Greek manuscripts, and some of them also survive in Slavonic adaptations. So they were exported to Kievan Rus. So this music also went north. And then some of the most plentiful information is from the final period of the final dynasty, the Palaiologan dynasty of the Eastern Roman Empire. We have Saint Thessaloniki, who wrote his own set of directions for how worship should be conducted according to the old rite of Hagia Sophia, had his own Thessalonian Cathedral of Hagia Sophia. He also wrote liturgical commentaries where he describes blow by blow what the services were like and what the theological meanings were, and even composed some of his own prayers in addition to the old ones. And we have a lot more notated musical manuscripts from this period, many of them from Thessaloniki, including from Thessaloniki the only manuscripts, and there are two of them, that include the complete daily cycle of morning and evening prayer. And it ran on a 2-week cycle. So here's one of these literary witnesses, though. This is Dimitrios Komatinos, who was Archbishop of Oak, writing at the beginning of the 13th century. And he was asked about the types of services being done. He wrote back as advising his flock. Well, he says there are 2 established practices that contain and dictate the prayers, the hymns, and spiritual odes of the ecclesiastical office. The one practice, which is the more perfect one, is predominantly called the sung office, asmatiki. But it is not widespread, but is limited to a small number of places which we know, that is the great church of prosperous Constantinople, the famous Cathedral of Thessaloniki, and the far-famed Cathedral of Athens. Do you know what the Cathedral of Athens was in the 13th century? Panagia Atheniotissa? Does that ring a bell? The Parthenon. The Parthenon was the Cathedral of Athens longer than it was a pagan temple. It's just if you go to Athens today, though, the Bavarians who were so interested, and their followers who were so interested in Greek classical culture, stripped away all the Christian parts of the building when they, like the bell tower and the apse. So if you go to Athens today, if you want to know about, there's one, if you go to the wonderful, beautiful Acropolis Museum that's dedicated to its ancient heritage, there's like one column that's been adapted into a seat, and with a little sign saying, this was used as a bishop's chair. But if you want to know about its history as a cathedral, you have to go to the other museum in Athens, which is the early Christian and Byzantine Museum. So it's about a 25-minute walk away. So anyway, so he's saying yes. So we're doing this rite also in Athens, still in the 13th century. The second practice, Bishop Komatinos writes, is called the Agiopolitis. It's common to all, as every church of the Orthodox Christians honors it. And the Agiopolitis is, in fact, what we will celebrate tomorrow morning for Orthros. So the last gasp of this, as I've already mentioned, was really in Thessaloniki. And Archbishop St. Simeon of Thessaloniki, in addition to describing it, he also wrote letters to his clergy saying, let's really keep this going. So I beseech you in Christ that this ecclesiastic order be maintained forever, that because of the tradition of the fathers remain among you as a kind of divine spark, because we wish this to be observed and maintained always, we have added canons to it. Canons are poems from the Rite of Jerusalem. As sweetening and seasoning, lest some person make claims without knowledge of the order, being lukewarm and slothful and excuses for moving to abolish it on the pretext that we do not hear the usual canons which everyone sings. So these have now been added, and for the careful and zealous, it has become better ordered and more pleasant than the services celebrated in the monasteries. So in trying to save this old rite, he borrowed some hymns from the other rite to kind of keep people happy. So people would say, well, how come we don't hear the bits that we love? So now you got them. So in modern times, scholars have rediscovered and tried to reassemble the texts, first of all, of this old rite. So a leader in that was Professor Ioannis Foundoulis at the University of Thessaloniki, who produced practical editions for use in the chapel of the University of Thessaloniki of two of the very short services of this old rite. The afternoon service for fast periods, Trithekti, and this evening service, Panichis. Despite its name, which literally means all night, it really was a kind of like Compline. It's a kind of after-dinner service, evening service. So, now the texts are being reassembled, so we kind of know the form of the service. So, what about the music? So, we face the issue of what to do, how do we recover this old music? The first thing we confront is that this tradition that we call today commonly Byzantine chant or Byzantine chant or Byzantine music, but more historically it's been called ecclesiastiki psalmodia, psalmody, that ancient term, that it is a tradition that both you can learn by ear and that is very much a living tradition on the one hand, and it's also one that has manuscripts going back over 1,000 years. So, as you can see, it was recently declared one of the cultural heritages of the world by UNESCO. So the version, so the question is, how do we sing this music today? Well, so the solution that was arrived at in Thessaloniki at the university was to compose new music in accordance with the music we sing today. So Professor Andonis Aligizakis wrote new music using the kind of melodic patterns that we're used to today with the chanting. And then this was done on a kind of more elaborate, larger scale by Professor Grigorios Stathis at the University of Athens, with his choir, also the Maestores της Psaltikis Technis, the Maestors of the Psaltic art, and under Archbishop Christodoulos of Athens, these services started to be celebrated annually in the cathedral in Athens, using Professor Stathis' music. The other option, you go back to the old manuscripts, and you try to reconstruct the older melodies. Now, as I mentioned, the tradition, the notated tradition, goes back about 1,000 years, and some of the various earliest sources we have essentially give you just a character here or there. So you'll have a text written out and a little sign, maybe every third or fourth syllable, sometimes a little more concentrated, basically reminding the singer who's already learned the melody by ear, hey, watch out, you do something a little bit different here. And what we find that gradually, somewhere between the 9th and the 12th centuries, is that in various regions, these early forms of notation were filled out and made more precise. And by by the end of the 12th century, we have the notation that people call Middle Byzantine notation today. This is what scholars call it, Meso-Byzantinismiographia. And that's the notation that from the end of the 12th century stays in use all the way to the beginning of the 19th. So it had very long duration. And because it was, in many ways, and that's where if you look, I mean, you can't see the details of this chart, obviously, but you can notice in this chart there are some staffs that show up here and there, so basically, once the notation develops to a certain degree of specificity, then we can know what the sequence of the notes are with some precision. Now, the notation we use today, on the other hand, comes from a reform of that older notation at the beginning of the 19th century. This comes out with the work of the so-called three teachers, Chrysanthos of Maditos and his two colleagues, Hurmuzios and Grigorios, and they published both theory books and the repertory as they had received it. Here, for example, is a melody that's still sung today, on the left is the notation, the middle Byzantine notation. So this is copied in the late 18th century. This is music of Petros Peloponnesios, a cantor at the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and also composer of Ottoman secular music as well. This is a setting of Lord, I have cried to you. This is the beginning of Vespers in mode 1. And on the right side is that same melody put into the new notation. And you can see, even just graphically here, that these kind of take up about the same amount of space visually. And basically what the new notation did was add characters telling you how to subdivide the beat. So the old notation could tell you this, dot, 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 and it could tell you lengthenings, da, 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 but it couldn't tell you subdivision of the beat. Dot, 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 or dot, 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 or dot, 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 dot. So it only could give you the basic beat and lengthening. So you had to, if there were going to be faster notes, you had to determine them by context. So one of the things that the Reform did was add signs saying how to divide the beat. So whereas the old notation, if you just read it, what you see, what you get this. Kyrie ke kraxa proseisakuson mu, which when written out becomes Kyrie ke kraxa proseisakuson. So more or less what you see is what you get on both sides, just a few of the details written out. However, one thing that the people who did this notational reform, when they were transcribing the repertory that they were using at the time, they kind of did it at kind of 1-to-1 ratio. So what you see is what you get, more or less. One of these from the medieval period, however, by that time it had become traditional to read about 2 notes and sing about 8. So for example, if I do what you see is what you get with the melody here on the left, which is the same beginning of Psalm 140 for Vespers. So the old melody, Kyrie kraxa. So those are the first 2 words, Lord, I have called you. And when this melody was written out in the new notation, it was written like this. Kyrie, Kyrie, and so on. So it's about 4 times as long, which is very beautiful, and this sort of it works very well if you're doing an all-night vigil that you want to go 12 hours long, like they do on Mount Athos. But that presents problems if you're going to try to read those old melodies for the rite of Hagia Sophia using that type of long exegesis, they called it. There are indications that these old melodies, can be read very much at face value. And there are some cases where what we have notated in the old manuscripts is pretty much exactly what's still sung today. So for example, take the beginning of the prologue of the Kontakion for Christmas. Today the Virgin gives birth, I Parthenos Simeron, by St. Romanos the Melodist. So here's how it's written in the 13th century manuscript on the left. It starts with I Parthenos Simeron toni perusion tic dicti, if I'm reading what you see is what you get. And here, as it's published in Constantinople in the 19th century, I Parthenos imeron toni perusion dicti. Some very minor, cosmetic differences, but essentially the same tune. So in fact, actually, using that what you see is what you get approach, one of the milestones in bringing back the rite of Hagia Sophia was this Vespers done at St. Peter's College in Oxford. I was a junior research fellow at that time at St. Peter's, and the master of my college, I was working on the old rite of Hagia Sophia, and he was talking to me about what he was saying, and he asked me to explain, it's in a senior common room, with a glass of sherry in hand, the British thing. And he says to me, well, I'm explaining to the sort of services I'm studying, so, it would be lovely to have one of those in our chapel. And I said, well, we have to find singers who could do it. We'd have to edit all the things from the old manuscripts and stuff, and, probably we have to bring the singers. If you can put together the music, I can find the funding for you for the singers. And so, in fact, we got the Greek Byzantine choir of Lykurgos Angelopoulos to Oxford with His Eminence Metropolitan Kallistos Ware celebrating. Father Ephraim Lash and I and Yannis Arvanitis put together the textual and liturgical musical reconstruction, and we did the whole service of Vespers according to the old rite for the feast of the Sunday of the Fathers of the Council of Nicaea on 26th of May, and it took about 2 hours. And then since then, with Capella Romana, I continued to chip away at and working also with Yannis Arvanitis, my colleague, at reviving selectively elements of this. So, in fact, it was this program, Byzantium in Rome, which included elements of the rite of Hagia Sophia that had been transported to southern Italy and done there, that we performed at Stanford that year in 2013. And so that's, we met up with Jonathan and Abel and Bissera, and I said, well, maybe, we've got this project, and you've got the music, we've got the technology and this other stuff, so let's combine. So one of the times when Capella Romana was in the San Francisco Bay Area, we went to the Karma Studios, and you can see us all getting a microphone taped to my head, and so we could sing this old repertory of Hagia Sophia, but have it realized in that acoustic in real time. So not make a recording in a dry studio and then add reverb to it. So so we would hear ourselves as if we were singing in the building, and which then so. As Jonathan Abel and Elliot Canfield-Duffilou described this, our first visit there, because of Hagia Sophia's reverberation is so rich and long-lasting, and the extent to which it influences performance decisions so great, the performers of Capella Romana needed to record this music in the acoustics of Hagia Sophia. They needed to react to and interact with the acoustics of the space while they performed. We used closed microphones to record the dry vocal signals, and use fast real-time convolution based on our acoustical measurements of Hagia Sophia to create live oralization signals. These reverberant signals are played out of the loudspeakers while the ensemble performs so that the performers hear themselves in the simulated Hagia Sophia. In this way, vocalists can tailor their performances to the acoustics of Hagia Sophia even in a recording studio or concert hall. And it did. It affected how the tempos that we took. We had to slow a lot of things down. We also would understand kind of why certain melodies were written the way they were, because I mentioned before about that sounds would hang in the air for a while, and so that why certain melodies seemed to concentrate on certain notes, it became pretty obvious once we were singing in that acoustic. If you want to see a pretty picture of what that means, all the choppy bits there at the top when we're without the Hagia Sophia acoustic, and then it's turned into this wonderful smooth surface once they add the oralization. So that was 2011 when we sort of signed. In 2013, we came to do a live public demonstration of this. So we took mostly chants that we'd already done in other circumstances from the rite of Hagia Sophia, but also a couple of new things specifically edited from medieval manuscripts for this performance. and we performed a half of a concert for a live audience in the acoustic Hagia Sophia. And I'll just give you a little bit of a cherubic hymn by Manuel Chrysafis. So he was a 15th century composer, worked for the last emperor, and was probably one of the last people to compose new music, Christian music for Hagia Sophia. So this is the kratima section of his cherubic hymn. So it's the part where it says when it kind of reaches a climax just as the entrance of the gifts is happening. Spinning ball of appledom. Yes, come on. Let me just wonder why are we pausing here? A spinning ball of crashing. All right. So I may, no, it's still, let me just control, no, escape. Okay, I think I may have to do the dread reboot. So if you'll give me 1 minute here, stretch your legs or something like that for a second, and I'm going to do a quick reboot of the machine. Not sure why it decided to be cranky. No. Yes, so there are lots of good sweets at the back. Okay, let's reboot here. So
not your sound, but the media player who got volume control.
there is a little bit of control.
Turn that down just a little
Oh, I thought that was but this might have still been on. Okay. I'm going to also quit that, quit that, quit that, and quit that, and okay. All right. Now we are enable content. All right, there we are. Now we're back. Come on. All right. So, anyway, I'll just give you let's skip to the reaction. So, a critic from the San Francisco Classical Voice wrote to this. To the skeptical or those allergic to computer-simulated environments, this may sound like so much caca or the hallucinations of an aging 60s tripper. But I know no other way to describe an experience that, in Professor Bisera-Pencheva's words, was intended to create a sensation that you were standing in a space that was neither in this world nor in heaven, that you were hovering in between. Well, we've heard that, before, haven't we? The visitors to Hagia Sophia, the emissaries of Prince Vladimir Volodymyr of Kiev and Rus, who were shopping for a religion for the Slavs, and they went there to Hagia Sophia and they burned incense and the choirs sang hymns. The emperor accompanied the Russians to the church and placed them in the wide space, calling their attention to the beauty of the edifice, the chanting and the offices of the archpriest and the ministry of the deacons. The Rus were astonished and in their wonder praised the Greek ceremonials. And then further they reported, we went on to Greece and the Greeks led us to the edifices where they worshiped their God, and we knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth. For on earth there is no such splendor of beauty, and we are at a loss how to describe it. We know only that God dwells there among men, and their service is fairer than the ceremonies of other nations. We cannot forget that beauty. So, we then took this on the road with a journalist who did a story for the KQED, the local San Francisco NPR station, about the Stanford project. Had it picked up by Pop-Up magazine, which is a little bit like, if any of you know, the Moth Radio Hour. So it's a series of sort of storytellings of various sorts, but they were only done to a live audience. And the Hagia Sophia story became one of those stories for one of the years of the tours. So we took it to 6-7 cities, and what one critic wrote in Playbill was that they sing and it's 537 AD. This is what it must have felt like, nearly. Lovely becomes transcendent. Writing about this now cannot capture what happened in that room, the story, the awe. So this is, hardcore, not church audiences, but and they were just, many of them moved to tears by the audience. So in 2016, we decided to do a completely new program. So this was where we selected the offices of the services for the exaltation of the Holy Cross and presented a full-length program of auralized chant at Bing Concert Hall in San Francisco. Most of this music was then recorded the following week at the Karma Studios and has been released, as I've mentioned, on the 2019 album Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia. We picked this day for a number of reasons. Part of it because its services were very unusual. So at Hagia Sophia, Constantinople, and also in Thessaloniki, the day began with Vespers according to the old rite of Hagia Sophia. Then there would be a procession to the Forum, and then acclamations in the dome. So they put singers up in the dome of Hagia Sophia. And then they had a special, just one day of the year, a special morning prayer service of Orthros, where they mixed the rites of Jerusalem and Constantinople. So you had cathedral antiphons, psalms, but also mixed with a canon of Cosmas from Jerusalem. And then this majestic ceremony, the exaltation and veneration of the cross and the divine liturgy. So the service of Vespers was the kind of standard format for Vespers according to the old rite on a feast day. Vespers began with an opening blessing, and everyone was here in the narthex. They start the service in the narthex. Nobody is in the main part of the church. And the service starts with Psalm 85, with the refrain, Glory to you, O Lord. Yes, 103 is Jerusalem, 85 was Constantinople. That's how Vespers began in Constantinople. And then they had another antiphon. So on weekdays they would have up to 7 of them, but then on this day they would jump to the last in the series. And then at Psalm 140, they would enter the main body of the church. And the choir would assume its position around the ambo, and then the higher clergy would enter into the sanctuary. And then you had a psalm verse sung from the ambo, the prokimenon, and then some litanies, some of the ones we're still used to from Vespers evening prayer, and then 3 little antiphons at the end of the service, and then the apolitikion troparion, the hymn Lord Save Your People, which we still sing. So, because I've given you some asides and other things along the way, I'll try to get through this material quickly. The main thing was that the Vespers service, again, the cathedral rite, consisted basically of psalms and refrains. So a soloist would start it off, then the choir would take it up, and then a larger group of people would sing a refrain. And this essentially, the whole service is just permutations of this call and response. So this was true also of Psalm 140, which only had a single refrain, Despota Kyrie Simono anapembo merisperinon hymnon eleison. It is only you, O Lord and Master, that we send up our evening hymn. Have mercy on us. So just give you a little bit of this, how it goes. Anyway, you get what, and then the other choir comes in with another verse, and they just keep repeating that same refrain over through the entire psalm. So it's kind of mesmerizing, but very different from how we sing Psalm 140 today. I've also mentioned for you that there were small antiphons. Well, the first of those small antiphons, you might recognize the refrain. Tes presviestis Theotokos oter sosonimas. At the prayers of the Mother of God or of the Theotokos, Savior, save us. In fact, what we have at the beginning of the Divine Liturgy today is one of those sets of three antiphons taken from the old cathedral rite. And they used to do it also at the end of Vespers as well. So the morning service is vastly complicated, but has some really, really beautiful music So it takes some of these old cathedral forms but kind of expands them greatly. Some cases musically, with much more elaborate music, and in some cases by adding these texts from the Rite of Jerusalem. But I'm going to then go to the actual exaltation of the cross. So we have two melodic traditions for this famous hymn, Lord, save your people and bless your inheritance. Soson Kyrie ton laons, give Lord there's a simple setting, and this is what probably they would have used most frequently and as a refrain to psalms. However, there's also another setting that is in the Asmatikon, which is the old choir book, the book of the for the kind of elite choir of Hagia Sophia, and it's a much more elaborate setting. I'll just play the beginning of it. Gets you through the first phrase, Lord, save your people and bless your inheritance. There we are. This is my final example. I thought I'd choose something that pulls all sorts of things together, and this is the prokimenon. Now, the prokimena are psalm responses. They're one of the oldest parts of the services, and probably in early late antiquity they might have been an entire psalm, but across the traditions, they seem to have been very quickly cut down to shorter things, and they were done by a soloist and then responded to by a choir. So as a result, that this is preserved in the book called the Psaltikon, which is the book of the soloist. So we here chant the prokimenon before the apostolic reading of the Apostolos, the epistle, at the divine liturgy, with the full original order, where there's a blessing from the throne first, people respond, and with your spirit, wisdom, a psalm of David. It's very elaborate. And the soloist would have been up on the ambo, so it would have been a kind of climactic point visually as well. So here we go. So I hope are we online to be able to have this? Let me just check here. Come on. Let's just check that we're... Oh, there we go. That's now appeared. Let's just make sure that we're there. There we are. Yay. So I mentioned before that some of the soloists were eunuchs, not having any with us. We had Fotini Downey Robinson provide the singing some of the verses in the higher octave. So what's today a kind of passes by in a flash in most modern Greek practice at the Divine Liturgy, the Prokeimenon, they just recite the psalm verses. It, in the Middle Ages, was one of the most solemn moments, just as you're about to hear the Word of God. And the Alleluia that followed it also was done with equal solemnity. So you had, sort of elaborate music, reading, elaborate music, reading. So by way of conclusion, I'd like to invite you to explore further the recently recovered musical traditions of Hagia Sophia. One place to start is with the website of Icons of Sound Project, just Icons of Sound at Stanford, where you will find a documentary about the project, additional short videos, and articles with extensive bibliography. There's also the Lost Voices album itself, the music of which we've only had time to sample. Capella Romana has also released other recordings with repertoire from the traditions of Hagia Sophia. In addition to Byzantium and Rome, which I mentioned earlier, a recording of chants from the manuscripts of the collection of the Holy Monastery of St. Catherine's on Mount Sinai includes items from the old rite of Hagia Sophia, including the Akoulothia tis Kaminu, which was a little quasi-drama, dramatic version of the story of the three youths in the fiery furnace that was done on the Sunday before Christmas. Of course, there is still much more to be studied and performed. But with that, I just thank you all for your attention and would welcome any questions you might have. Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you, Doctor. That was magnificent. When you created the sound of St. Sophia, is it my understanding that you took that on the road?
That we
Took it on the road to other places?
We did. Yeah, we just we can. I mean that if you have the right equipment, it can be reproduced in other places.
How did that happen?
Well, I mean, we just did it 3 weeks or a month ago in Vancouver, BC, and Corvallis. So what you have to do is, in both those cases, we had one of the members of the staff of Karma came up with their laptop and proprietary software. We have a tech rider that lists that, so I think a minimum of 8 speakers, but when we were at this facility at Oregon State University, which is set up for much fancier things, I think we had over a dozen speakers, an array of speakers. You need sort of certain types of soundboards and everything else, but yeah, it can be done. And then the proper type of mics, either ones that we strap to our heads there, or we use the kind of the little ones that they use for musical theater today. And that can be done. We've also done this program, though, also in natural acoustics. So if we're in a lovely cathedral acoustic building, we don't need the technology. So we've done it, for example, at last year at St. Ignatius in New York, which has maybe 3-4 seconds of ring time, not 10, but and we also did, and we have done it at the Basilica in St. Louis and a few other places, just with the natural acoustic of the building.
I have a follow-up question to that one. Perhaps the natural question is, could that system be reproduced here in this parish, or let's say some other parish?
Yes.
Or all parishes?
Well, I mean, you wouldn't want to. I mean, you would do it for special purposes. I mean, that's precisely if you wanted to experience what it's like to hear that particular sound signature of Hagia Sophia. So, in fact, in Vancouver, BC, we did it with the permission of Metropolitan or Archbishop now Sotirios of Toronto. We put the speaker array in St. George's Cathedral. So the thing was, St. George's had enough carpet in it, so it's not so good for the day-to-day singing, but it helped deaden the sound enough so that the speakers would be effective and not just create a wash. Because again, if you have a proper natural acoustic, you can get that. We also did a shortened version of this program at St. Nicholas a couple of years ago at Ground Zero. So, but yes, but no, but we have if the church building is suitable for that, we have already done it once, 1 month ago.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. So my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is the acoustics are based on where the choir is standing, right?
No, I mean the acoustics first and foremost are about the building. So the building itself, I mean, then beyond that, then the different places in the building will have different characteristics as well. So for example, when and then what the measurements that were taken by the Stanford team, they did actually, they had, so the balloon pops in 2008 or wherever it was, 2000 or 2010, but also they came back later and did another set of measurements using a more kind of elaborate technology using sine sweeps, which is where you make this kind of sort of sound and then have that propagate through the building. They were given permission to, and there had been an earlier Danish team. So then when what we did with, for the recording, the 2016 recording was a considerably refined acoustical model. But for example, what we did when we then went, after we recorded it, when we did two mixes of it. We did a standard stereo mix, so to come out of two speakers, and that's the kind of CD version or if you go to, versions of that will be what you find on Spotify and the like. But we also did an Atmos version. So if those of you who know what that is what the sort of the movie theaters and the like will use, which includes not only surround but also height. So we went to Skywalker Studios and had so the people were sort of walking by in the hallway. They're used to hearing movie scores. Sort of. What are you, medieval chant? Oh. So, but for the Prokeimenon that you just heard, the version that's on the Atmos recording, which you have to, I'm not sure if the Apple spatial audio version includes this, but the DVD is the Blu-ray. There's a Blu-ray version of this if you buy the kind of the physical packet, and the Blu-ray has it. If you have the system, you will hear. So we placed the patriarch in the apse. So in the back, of the synthronon, where there was where the clergy would officiate from at the back of the altar, we had the deacon kind of in front of the templon, what was the kind of predecessor to the iconostasis, and then we had the soloist also raised above in the ambo. We had the choir around him below singing the refrains, and for those keto pneumatisus, and with your spirits and so on, we had a larger sound from the rest of the building, as if the congregation was all responding keto, and we actually kind of tracked it over a couple of times, so we essentially had the effect of a congregation all around you responding. So I mean, there are clever things you can do. So it is both the general acoustical signature of the building, but then where you stand in it will make a difference, and then the technology has some capability of reproducing that as well.
Okay, I think that's what I was trying to ask, is it like if you could reproduce the sound of somebody standing in the back of the church and how that would sound to them.
So you can choose. It depends, yeah. So that's what happened. I remember in our initial things, when we were doing these experiments in 2011, they would say, okay, so where would you think we'd be standing? And we'd hear ourselves sort of shifting in the room, the response of what we were singing around. Let's move this.
So are you saying that they were placing themselves in particular places of the church to be heard, or that just happened?
Well, I mean, originally. So, I mean, yes, the placement to which they were heard. I mean, that's one of the reasons the choir was, the old place of the choir was just on the front end of the dome at the ambo. So that was a place where then the sound could propagate via the dome through the rest of the building. So there was very deliberate placement of where people were originally. And then there's the question of, people in certain, in a service will stand at different places depending on what the liturgical actions are, if they're processing in or whatever. So, then that's one of the things that if you're trying to reproduce that digitally, you then have to kind of, take account. And so I would draw maps. So, okay, yeah, for this one, and when the recording we did last year at UCLA of the St. Demetrius, we did so there's another team that we've been involved with some. My former doctoral student, Spiron Donopoulos, was a core member of this team of people from UCLA and USC, Professor Sharon Gerstel, Professor Chris Kyriakakis, and others who went to Thessaloniki where the churches, you can sing in them. And so they not only took measurements and also Thessaloniki is wonderful because you have everything from early Christian churches like Achiropitos, which is an early Christian basilica, all the way to late Byzantine monastic churches. And they not only took readings, the sort of readings that they were allowed to take at the Stanford team at Hagia Sophia, as just sort of neutral readings of the sound signatures, but they also did experiments with singing in them as well. And singing some of this repertoire. And so when we did this recording last year of excerpts of the services for St. Demetrius from the late medieval period, when we recorded it, they auralized us and put us in Hagia Sophia Thessaloniki. So that's now waiting for post-production. So we're hoping it's out within the year.
Could you say something about a available catalog of mappings that, like the one we've been talking about this evening, other ancient cathedrals that have been mapped?
Yeah, there have been more and more of these sort of projects going on. People who've decided to kind of take things to the next stage and do detailed studies of them and maybe get musicians involved have mostly been in dealing with Western churches. So I'm trying to think. There was a project on. It's actually a Byzantine church, San Marco in Venice. There was a British project that went and did acoustical measurements there, and they had people, performing in there. And there's a whole. Deborah Howard, I think, is the name of one of the scholars involved with that team. There have been some cases now where they've. I know I think it's at the University of Newcastle, if I remember correctly. Or maybe Birmingham, maybe people have both things where there's a ruined pre-Reformation chapel for where they have one of the books of music that was sung there, and this is in England. And the building itself is in ruins, but they've used the digital technology to reconstruct what the rest of the building would be like and then what the sound of it would have been like in it. So, so there have been a number of these things out there, but I think the project of Thessaloniki is called Soundscapes of Thessaloniki. I'm trying to remember, but they've had a number of publications so far.
When you take the show on the road, does the team have to go ahead and then bring some stuff back to the lab? Can you describe the process?
No. We have the acoustical signatures already. It's in the laptop, so we just need, as long as we have the right equipment to reproduce it. So we travel together and then do it.
Thank you very much for the lecture. It was very touching. My question is, in the theater, the stage is this big, so you got to have everybody in the right spot. So in Hagia Sophia, we would have the patriarch, let's say here, and the choir would be however it is. And as the service is growing, all that, the sound of it, is it for him to hear it best? Because everybody in the church or in the cathedral will hear it differently. Because in Richmond, if I'm sitting on this side and I hear the choir, it sounds a lot different than when I'm in the right rear. It's still beautiful. And just like, you said about the singer, the soloist, and the dome, is that something that happened with the director, well, let's try
yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, the thing is that your perspective will change. So say if you're, I imagine, under one of these, underneath one of the galleries. So yes, Sophia has balconies up there, galleries. And if you are underneath them and not in the central nave, you will hear a sound that has been, bouncing around some other places before it gets to you first. So it's not going to be as clear of a sound as when you're in the central nave, or perhaps on one of the balconies, then sort of, so there are better and worse acoustic spots, or different ones. Some of these older buildings, though, I mean, they are designed to emphasize that, and the people who are producing the sound are put in the places where they would be of maximum effect. I mean, this is something that we now, just take now, I'm using this body mic, and you are hearing the sound coming at you from all sorts of things. You are correcting for that, because I'm still producing some natural sound, and you can see me visually here. But we've now got used in the last, 75 years, 50 years, to services where the celebrant will have a microphone and is sort of, instead of being hourly identifiable as coming from one part of the church, now is coming from all parts of the church. And it's something that actually changes the experience of worship, and so also things like congregational singing, of which there was of the refrains in the old rite of Hagia Sophia. These things get affected by modern design, which is designed essentially for electronic reproduction of sound. I mean, an example of that is have you been to the cathedral in Tirana, in Albania? I mean, it's this wonderful modernist building that Archbishop Anastasios had built to be kind of visionary, but it was built by modern architects, so it is terrible for sound. And so they've had to keep doing one thing after another to try to make people heard somehow, and it sort of works okay for the celebrants because they can because again, modern architects, what they think want is noise suppression, so that what you hear is just what is mediated by the electronics. Whereas ancient buildings are the opposite. They are designed for the natural propagation of sound, and where you orally can figure out where people are coming from.
Any other question? Anybody else? I have a question for you.
Please.
From your research and your studies, could we put an intent to the architects when they built Hagia Sophia? Did they anticipate, or did they intend to have this kind of sound propagation, or does it come, obviously they were aware of the beauty and the architectural, but did that come as a result of that versus a real intent?
Well, I think the short answer is yes, that they were intending. Were they going to be completely aware of the exact result? No, but the thing is that they're building, Anthemius of Tralles, and I'm trying to remember the other architect, who were both, kind of classically schooled architects, that they're working with the technology of their time. St. Sophia was also a rush job, because the earlier basilica had been destroyed by the Nika riots. And so Justinian had this place built lickety-split. So the technology of their time, which was designed, because there were no microphones, so you can't, if you're building a building, you design it for the propagation of sound. Otherwise, it's not a good building. So I think that they intended it, I think there are certain things that probably came about because it was so unique than the sound that happened to have such a long ring time, that then affected people's perception of worship in that building afterwards. This is one of the things that Bisera Penchavas, and kind of I, to a lesser extent, have kind of talked about. that the building, there are things that happen there where there are descriptions of like angels in the dome and so on. And besides just that, actually there were eventually images, a few images of angels up in the around the dome, but there are ways that the sound interacts, goes up and is mixed there, and then comes showers back down. That once people discovered that it happened, that it was again part of the whole sort of mystique of the building and part of its overwhelming effect.
Okay, do you have any more questions?
I've got another quick question. So maybe not quick, but hopefully, according to John, what is like the main difference between early like medieval Byzantine music, kind of the average of the rites, and the main difference between that and Western music with like the mensuration signs and like that kind of plain chant, Gregorian chant?
Well, I mean, if you go back on the early end, that they are kind of different dialects of a kind of common, I would say, if you're talking about the chant, say of Milan, the Milanese, right, Constantinople, of Jerusalem, and so on, that they are all sister traditions within a common cultural space. That there is interchange between them because there are chants that go across. The Trisagion ends up being sung on Good Friday in Rome. It goes there from Jerusalem as part of the veneration of the cross services. They also sing Ton Stavronsu as well, and then we venerate your cross. Other places in Italy, there's excerpts of hymns of Saint Romanos that were reworked into chants in the Italian peninsula. So, and the testimony that we have from people going east and west on those early ends, that they're not weirded out by what they hear. In fact, they borrow stuff from each other. That's how the system of the 8 modes that we have. First tone, second tone, first mode, second, and so on. Plagal. That gets optimized under Charlemagne, and by the Franks as a system for the classification of Gregorian chants. So people heard commonality. So I think that the Western music, that in Eastern, they start off within a common cultural matrix, and then they start to develop in parallel, and then there's at various points exchange between, sometimes influence going one way, sometimes going the other, and then that's another story.
Any other question? Are we okay? There is a good discussion with questions, okay, if you don't mind extending it a little bit longer.
Thank you so much for your talk. Could you speak to the differences between Western Gregorian chant, say, and the chant of Hagia Sophia, and how those changes occurred, if they did, as a result of architectural differences in the sanctuaries?
Okay, so let's take Rome, just Rome and Constantinople. So in other words, old Rome and new Rome. So the old imperial capital and new imperial capital. If we're talking about the old rite of Hagia Sophia, just in terms of its basic framework, it has a lot of similarities to the Roman rite in that the Roman rite also has very little in the way of non-scriptural hymnography, like the old rite of Hagia Sophia, just a lot of psalms and biblical texts. So they're both kind of conservative in that way. There are structural similarities in the ways that, say, Prokimena and graduals and Alleluia. And the Allelujarian, James McKinnon, is one of the people who thought essentially that the Roman Allelujahs are essentially an import from the East anyway, from Constantinople. So I think that they are kind of sibling traditions. Christopher Page, in his book on the Christian West, the first 1,000 years, or what, I forget the exact title of it. But he also talks about how in this period from kind of Pope Gregory the Great onwards, then after Pope Gregory the Great, you get a whole series of Eastern popes, people either from Syria or from Greek-speaking southern Italy or whatever, And then we find in Rome that a whole bunch of the institutions for singing of Constantinople are duplicated. So there is the orphanotrophio, the orphanage of Constantinople with its boys' choir, is duplicated in Rome. The ways that the role of reader singers and deacon singers is duplicated in Rome. So their whole series is about the infrastructure. Like in the old Roman rite, which didn't make it into the later. So what we call Gregorian chant, sorry to geek out too much, but Gregorian chant is the version of the chant of Rome gone north, written down in the Frankish Empire, and eventually it comes south later when the northern Europeans take control of the Italian peninsula, and by the 11th century they then repress the original version of the repertory in Rome. But that older version, which scholars called Old Roman, for example, during Easter week includes a whole series of Alleluias that with Greek texts. And there were Greek speakers in Rome, and so again, I think that what we have are common origins there, and plenty of evidence of interchange.
Okay, one question before the last. Anybody else? Okay, so this is the last question. From a musical perspective, would we rather have the crispiness and the resolution in music, or would rather have the reverberation that is not only at the end, but propagates through the musical notes from one to the next and kind of loses its resolution?
I think that depends on the circumstances and the music, because then the music will be written in some cases differently. This is one of the interesting things about this project in Thessaloniki, that some of these churches, I think like Hagia Katerini or some of these late monastic churches, they just surprise the team that they're exceedingly dry. So in other words, that the sound gets, I think it's because the particular type of stone they use gets sort of sucked up very rapidly. So that even when someone is singing, it kind of then starts getting assimilated some to speech. But on the other hand, if you were in a large basilica, these cities that had large populations in them. So it's one thing for a small monastic community, right? You're in a small building, doesn't matter, you can hear each other. But if you are singing to a congregation of thousands, you absolutely need the building to carry the sound for you. Again, this is before the introduction of microphones. So the only way you're going to get is, first of all, people will sing. This is one of the reasons our readings are sung. And there even used to be a special notation that was in the books of the epistle and the gospel and so on, to show you how to sing them. That singing was fundamental to the propagation of sound, so you had to have a certain amount of resonance. Now, that resonance, though, the fact that the sound will stay in the air, there are different ways that it can as well. So like I've sung in St. Paul's in London, which also has a 10-second ring time, but it's a very different sort of sound than Hagia Sophia, because it has this extremely long nave. And what happens there is that the sound just kind of keeps going and going, and then comes back to you, and then it kind of crashes over itself in certain ways. So it makes intelligibility very hard to, very difficult. Whereas for the way the old Psalms went in the old rite of Hagia Sophia, Thu Kyrie philakintos tomatimu kethiran periochis peri tahilimu. It's like inflected speech, where every time there's an accent, you get pam, 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 with a very standardized cadence, so that the music there works with the building for those tones that are held to enhance intelligibility. So there are some, whereas if you were to sing, if you're like the modern versions, which jumps around a bit more, that would militate against. And then some of these, even like the old Sosonkiria you heard, it tended to concentrate on certain parts of the scale for certain times, which also would help comprehensibility even when the text is drawn out. So I think it's a much more kind of nuanced thing, depending on the community, the time, the place, and the right.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. Thank you so much, Professor
Thank you.
Lingas. A very enlightening presentation, and we appreciate the music so much. Thank you. Hang around, discuss, talk. There are more suites at the table there. Thank you also for those attending through the live streaming. Have a good evening. Ωραία. Αλέξανδρε.